Number 10. Emma Frost and Cyclops. Don't get me wrong, I like this relationship overall in retrospect, but as this unfolded, it was pretty controversial. Not even just for fans reading along as this developed, but also in the Marvel universe. Scott and Emma's relationship started as an affair, with him being with Jean at the time. Jean and Scott, however, did end up parting ways after Jean learned that Scott was having a psychic affair with Emma. Even weirder was that sometimes in their sexy mind affair, Emma would basically cosplay as Jean, making herself look just like her for Scott. It was all pretty crazy. Emma and Jean would have a pretty intense fight regarding this whole affair, and even today, having buried the hatchet now, still have their moments of sassy animosity towards one another, but then they also have their moments of supporting one another. It's pretty cute. Number 9. Aunt May and J. Jonah Jameson. This one was more shocking, I suppose, than controversial, but still. There is nothing wrong with Aunt May moving on and finding love, of course, but I don't think that many of us ever suspected that when she did move on, it would be with JJ. And even more shocking was when Peter at one point walked in on them together when they were in bed. Yikes. Also, what a way to find out that your Aunt May is dating someone. That's a way to find that out. And you might be thinking, are either of these characters really heroes, Amanda? Should they really be on this list? Aunt May is definitely one of Peter's heroes, and in the alternate reality of Earth 3123 is a literal hero, with her taking Peter's place as a spider-like super who goes by the name of Spider-Man. And so for that reason, I think we can count Aunt May today. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more controversial superhero romances, I have so many that I want to talk to you about. So please be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Roy Harper and Donna Troy and The Flash. I mean, this was just a really weird time for Wally, and that is likely a big part of what made this love triangle romance so strange. What happened here was that Donna Troy and Wally West ended up together after the main continuity was reset. Wally knew of his past life with Linda and his kids, but his kids were now seemingly gone, with Linda not remembering who he was or their marriage or relationship from the prior continuity. Donna was there to support Wally through this, and the two ended up together. Roy, however, had a crush on Donna and ended up heartbroken as a result. Ouch. And then shortly after, Wally West lost control during Heroes in Crisis, and coincidentally, not even intentionally apparently, killed Roy Harper, among others. It's just a pretty strange scenario, I guess, and a really strange coincidence? Number 7. MARROW and Spider-Man. I feel like there have been multiple times in the comics where writers have tried to shape MARROW into something she inherently is not. And that is exactly what was going on here when she ended up in a relationship with Peter Parker. Sarah at this time didn't even really know who she was, as her mind had basically been wiped by S.H.I.E.L.D., so she literally was being rewritten as a character. Literally. What's worse is that Peter wasn't just fellow Super Spider-Man to her at this point, he was a guest lecturer and is currently a professor at her university. He also becomes aware later on that Sarah is actually MARROW, and what's worse is that her Sarah persona was built by S.H.I.E.L.D. out of implanted memories. So he also kinda knows this is going on. Granted, he didn't have a lot of time to do anything about that, but still. So the two also date briefly while MARROW isn't really fully herself. So this relationship wasn't just weird and out of place, but also felt pretty shady overall for, well, multiple reasons. At least it was oddly brief, and MARROW did end up returning to a more true version of herself by the end. Kind of reconciling both sides of herself, but yeah, Sarah was definitely a very intense opposite, I feel like, to MARROW. Number 6. Raven and Wallace West. This is a pretty weird one, especially considering Wally West and Raven's history, which we're not going to talk about in this list, but maybe if we do a part 2, I'll talk about that almost romance. Raven and Wallace West were in a romantic relationship, which is pretty weird if you consider the age difference and also just the different stages of life that they're both in. While this relationship seems to have disappeared in current continuity, it is interesting to note that Wallace West is now a sort of student at Teen Titans Academy, while also being a member of one of the teams of the Teen Titans and a teenager. And Raven is back to being her all-around, normal, youthful, though no longer teenage self, with her being one of the faculty at the academy. That means that unless we make some important adjustments for either hero in terms of their ages, their relationship, when it did happen, was pretty controversial to say the least. I think there was supposed to be kind of an age tweak when that relationship happened, but yeah, if you don't know that, you'd just be like, what's going on? Raven's dating a teenager. What's happening?
Number 5. Iron Man and Gamora. If you put 2008 Tony Stark in a room with Gamora, like pre-pepper pots, I guarantee you that guy would at least turn on the charm. The idea doesn't come out of nowhere though. I mean, Tony and GAMORA, believe it or not, have hooked up before. So the panel starts with GAMORA being all coy and cool. She says the line, "Well, you're gonna have to do much better out here." And Tony responds in his classic Tony Stark manner, "I can do better." And then it immediately cuts to Tony laying next to her in bed. They look like they just had the time of their lives. Tony's all tucked in the blanket. He looks shell-shocked. GAMORA's pretty chill about it. She's like, "Hey, I'm gonna go back to the bar. See ya." And then Tony's like, "Cool, true." And then after she leaves, Tony lets out the slightest, "Ow." Yeah, you don't say. It's probably gonna be a painful one.
Number 4, Supergirl and Comet. Yep, Supergirl once dated her horse, but I guess it was kinda okay because it turned out that he was a real boy in the end. Well, he became one. Or he became a man, really, maybe I should say, who when transformed into a human took the name of Bill Starr, Bronco Bill Starr. It turned out Comet's backstory was actually that he was once part man, part horse and lived as a centaur. Even more odd, he also had a brief relationship with Lois Lane at one point. That's another thing that happened. While under his guise as Bill Starr, Comet would also work as a rodeo star and trick rider. I guess it takes being a horse to know how to really ride a horse? Something like that? Number 3, She-Hulk and the Hulk. Another weird relationship, of course, is the relationship between fellow superheroes and cousins, She-Hulk, Jennifer Walters, and the Hulk, Bruce Banner. Of course, these two don't get together in the 616 universe, though there was a time when the Hulk did go into kind of like a hormonal, lust-filled rage and attempted, very roughly so, I might add, to get with She-Hulk. While She-Hulk managed to dodge that very disturbing and looming intimate relationship in 616, in the Old Man Logan universe of Earth 807128, it kinda became unavoidable for her. In this reality, She-Hulk and Hulk are implied to have become a couple that were the heads of an inbred family of Hulks. We also don't really know if She-Hulk was into this or not into this, and it was kind of against her will. While we don't know the fate of She-Hulk really at all, Bruce himself had become old and crazy due to the gamma radiation affecting his sanity over time. It's implied that Bruce believed that Jennifer was the only person on the planet that he would be able to mate with due to their biological superpowered similarities. Number 2, Jean Grey and Professor X. This has to be one of the most controversial romances of our time, at least in my mind. Maybe I just read too much X-Men, so that's why this is like really high up for me. Well, they didn't have a romantic relationship. They did have a relationship that had some really weird romantic undertones from pretty much day one. Professor X showed interest in Jean via his thought bubbles, but claimed he could never bring himself to let her know. Not because he was presumably much older and later established to be so, or because he was her teacher and professor at his own self-created school, but because he was the leader of the mutant team and was confined to a wheelchair. And how could he ever burden Jean with that? How could she ever accept that I'm confined to a wheelchair? It just reminds me of Scott. How could she ever accept that I can never take off my glasses? So yeah, just even on the surface, this whole thing is pretty controversial. Then of course there are all the other creepy moments from across the multiverse when it comes to the professor's feelings towards Jean. What I'm saying is, there's just more layers here than I really have time to peel back and discuss, but if you do want me to discuss them, you need to request a top 10 list on all of those creepy Professor X Jean moments, because there's a lot. Number 1, Donna Troy and Terry Long. Donna Troy was only a teenager when she met and fell in love with Terry Long, with him initially being a history professor at the college she also attended. I don't think he was ever explicitly her teacher, but that one degree of separation isn't really enough to keep the ick out of this relationship. Terry perhaps was intended to be a younger professor as well, closer in age to Donna. At one point I think it's mentioned that he's at least 29, but then there is the fact that he had tenure and was already divorced with a possibly preteen daughter from his previous marriage, Jennifer, who we later see as a teenager. The fact that Terry Long started out as a side character who also looked a lot like Marv Wolfman did at the time, and ended up somehow marrying Donna and constantly fawning over her BFF, model, and fellow teen, Starfire, is all pretty wild, to say the least, when you're looking back.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Squirrel Girl and Wolverine. Dorian Green made her comic book debut in Marvel Superheroes Volume 2, Issue 8. See, back in the early 90s, she was born with these fantastic squirrel abilities, including a tail to complete the picture. In the New Avengers Volume 2, Issue 7, the two of them have a brief interaction that hints that they could have been romantically involved at one point. There's some tension in the air, that's for sure. They're talking about being professional and also how amazing they look too. That's already enough evidence in my mind, but to make things even more interesting, later on in Wolverine Volume 4, Issue 8, Dorian is seen in Wolverine's mindscape with Emma Frost, Mystique, Spiral, and Jewel. This was the sexual fantasies room, so I mean, proof's in the pudding, guys. Number 9, Crystal and Quicksilver. In Fantastic Four, Issue 45, Johnny Storm met Crystal, sister of Medusa, and they hit it off naturally. Johnny thought she was straight out of a fairy tale, and once they showed each other their powers, well, love. Love comes next, of course. The Fantastic Four needed a replacement temporarily while Sue was recovering from having their first child, so this Inhuman, Crystal, was looking to fill that spot. So Johnny and Crystal dated after this, and Crystal was front cover by time Fantastic Four issue 81 rolled around. And then in Avengers 104, after a battle with a Sentinel, Quicksilver gets hurt. So Crystal brought him back to her homeworld to heal him, and while they were there, the two of them ended up kind of falling in love. Everything happens fast in Pietro's life. If I was Johnny, I'd have a few choice words for him, that's for sure. And before we continue on with this list of weird superhero couples, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It really does help us a lot, especially while we're working from home. Those thumbs up really add up and help us out. You guys are the best, thank you so much. Now let's get right back into this list. Enough of wasting time. Number 8. Toad and Husk. When Toad was amongst the lucky few to have kept their powers after the events of M-Day, he didn't save the world one day at a time. Instead, he became a janitor at the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. He kept the school clean, he kept the kids on track. And then when the Phoenix Force approached Earth, Quentin Quire fell from the sky and Toad leaped far and wide to catch him. This impressed Husk quite a bit. So she quit the school thinking Kitty would just fire her anyways, and then she joined the Hellfire Academy later on, and she kinda made Toad betray the school once they started clicking. She's a little aggressive in her ways, some would say. Relationships have their ups and downs, but this is just another level. Because at the end of this 5-part roller coaster of emotions, Paige didn't even remember the entire thing. Poor Paige. And also poor Toad. I mean, he's gripping that mop tighter and tighter every day. All 5 parts are really fun. This relationship is nuts. I'd love to have Toad come and clean my place, just hang out, keep me in line, you know, he'd be nice.
Number 7, Madeline Pryor and Havoc. While Maddie is definitely more of a villain and Havoc was once a villain himself, currently in the comics, Havoc is a hero. So we're gonna count him as a hero for this list because yeah. And he's trying really hard. Oh, Havoc. Everyone go read Hellions, go do it right now. Besides, he's also been a hero in the past as well. So as I said, he is the hero for this relationship point. What was controversial about these two? Well, just about everything. Madeline Pryor was initially married to Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, Alex's brother. Madeline was also still married, I believe, when this romance began, and then she ended up turning Havoc into kind of her thrall and her Goblin King, or the very least her goblin consort. Remember those matching outfits? Oof, those themselves could be considered controversial to some, I think. Although I definitely love both of those outfits. I love that Havoc just had like a matching one to Madeline Pryor's like goblin queen outfit. It's pretty great.
Number 6. Kitty Pryde and Colossus. When people say age is just a number, that's like a couple years we're talking about. Maybe you're in your late 20s, you meet somebody in their early 30s, it's not that far off, but it sounds far off. That's what we're talking about when we say age is just a number. When it comes to Marvel romances, the whole age thing is a little gross. It's kind of gross. When the first two met in X-Men issue 129, she's said to be like 13 years old. They're trying to recruit her to go to Professor X's school, and Colossus is like 18 at the time, or somewhere around 20. He's like an adult. Now, in the Days of Future Past storyline, beginning in X-Men issue 141, we see Kitty and Colossus married in that future. So that's nice. I think. It's nice to know that they really are head over heels for each other. It kind of helps. Especially when it started with their first kiss during a space mission, and right before they kiss, Kitty even says, "Gee, I wish I was older," and Colossus is like, "So do I," and then proceeds to kiss her anyways.
Number 5, the Wasp and Magneto. This one happened over on Battle World in the 1984 limited edition Marvel Superhero Secret Wars comic. Here, Magneto made Janet his prisoner, but then set her free so that he could put some moves on her, because apparently he was into her. He saw Janet as being both beautiful and brilliant, and as such possibly someone who would be reasonable enough to consider becoming his ally. I would agree, I think Janet is both beautiful and brilliant. Their talks went well, but ultimately when Magneto started talking about the electricity between them, Janet was just not feeling it. He was like, I know you feel this thing, and she was like, your eyes are nice, I guess. I don't know. She told Magneto that she just wasn't really interested, firmly responding, no, 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 when he kissed her, but then despite her protests, she basically just decided to go along with it, which is also really weird. Their intimate but brief dalliance not only felt pretty non-consensual, but then it was later revealed that Jan was only going along with it so that she could get intel and betray Magneto. Wow. And after he made a comb for her using his magnetic powers and sheer will.
Number 4. Spider-Man and Black Cat. Peter Parker and Felicia Hardy, one of the more interesting relationships in Peter's life. Well, rather, Spider-Man's life. And there's a difference here between the two. You'll see. So she entered comics back in 1979 with Amazing Spider-Man issue 194. Now, when she met Spider-Man, they were of course both in costume. She fell for him, his charm, his quips. She could tell that he was a kind soul and she trusted him. It was turning into quite the romance between the two, and eventually Peter felt like the time was right and revealed his true self. He unmasked himself. And she had a tough time accepting the fact that he was just an average kid under the mask. Should have left the mask on, Pete. Rough. I mean, looks really don't matter, but when you're a superhero, it's probably different. This is taken to the next level in the Ultimate Comics. When Black Cat finds out that Spider-Man's just a kid, she literally throws up all over him. So sometimes it's better to keep things a mystery, I think.
Number 3, Deathstroke and TERRA. I mean, this is definitely a relationship reveal that will leave you reeling, confused, and likely kind of disgusted. Technically, neither Deathstroke or TERRA are really considered mainstay heroes, though both have allied themselves with the good guys in the past, and TERRA was for a time a seeming hero with the Teen Titans. Although part of her whole reveal as an undercover baddie, as well as part of her relationship with Beast, also led us to the revelation that she and Deathstroke were together. Now, let's keep in mind that TERRA is supposed to be a teenager, whereas Slade Wilson is, well, I mean, definitely an older man for sure. His hair is white, he has multiple kids. Yeah, it's just not great. Even worse, there has been added context given to us for this relationship which focuses heavily on the sexual attraction between these two. Just ick. You also have to consider the power dynamics here, with Slade being older and also kind of TERRA's boss in her undercover mission. So there's also that power dynamic that is like, just not great.
Number 2, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. Of course I'm gonna mention this couple on this list. From the Ultimate Universe, this is one of the weirder ones. In the 3rd issue of the Ultimates, the Wasp is like, man, those two sure do love each other, those siblings. And then Cap's like, well, of course they do. They're family, they're siblings. Even in the 1st issue, like way back in the original X-Men, Pietro tells Toad to stop chewing so loudly in front of his sister. They're close. But in the 3rd issue, the Wasp is like, dude, he loves her. Like, loves her. And then Captain America makes the same face that readers did at that point. Yeah, that's a weird one. Number 1, Wolverine and MJ. The Ultimate Universe has some interesting elements, as we just heard, and after Ultimate Spider-Man issue 66, it got even more weird when Wolverine and Spider-Man switched bodies. Mesmero switched their bodies, so Peter was like, hey man, I really need you to go to school. We've seen these Freaky Friday change-up style movies before. The whole fun is pretending to be the other person and trying to blend in with their lives. That's where the comedy comes from, right? This sounds like a hilarious adventure ready to happen, but while Wolverine was in Peter's body, he at one point ended up kissing Mary Jane. And it's made out like he even wants to date her, like he wants to go further after the kiss. MJ told him that she wants to wait until they're older for that kind of thing though, so thankfully nothing happened during this change up. But the kiss and the idea in the first place, yuck, you know? Yuck. I was gonna save Hulk Gang for number 1, but creepy Wolverine takes the cake.
Number 10, Rogue and Magneto. I feel like Magneto has a whole string of weird romances that I could just like talk about forever. Dating Magneto honestly just seems like it would be weird, intense, and kinda cool. Though I suppose the same could be said for his paramour here, Rogue. Rogue and Magneto had a brief almost romance in the main continuity when both found themselves stranded on the Savage Lands. But ultimately it was their allegiances and philosophies that kept them apart. You'd think the age difference might also potentially be a reason, as Magneto's daughter Polaris has always kinda seemed to have been depicted as being around Rogue's age, but nah, that never seems to come up. Granted, age isn't everything, but despite their great differences in terms of beliefs, there have been multiple universes where these two end up together, with a big part of the appeal likely being that Magneto, because of his powers, can actually physically touch Rogue, because his body is protected with a very tight magnetic shield. Number 9. Superman and Wonder Woman. Superman and Wonder Woman in theory sound like a great couple, but for many readers these two coming together really shook up the status quo in a way that a lot of fans weren't actually, well, a huge fan of. Superman, after all, has long been shipped with Lois Lane, and seeing a reality where the two did not come together was heartbreaking. And then of course for Wonder Woman she has Steve Trevor, although I feel like fans, myself included, weren't as heartbroken over the loss of that long-time relationship. I'm not a big Steve Trevor fan myself, so yeah. Booster Gold even expressed his own shock over Wonder Woman and Superman ending up together. For him, the couple was the end of the world. Literally. Booster Gold at one point has to travel back in the future in order to save his own future, but ends up being too late, as it turns out what he was meant to stop was Superman and Wonder Woman getting together. But at this point, they already have. Too late. Bye, Booster Gold, as he fades away. So Back to the Future. I love it. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more weird romances or controversial romances lists, I know I do, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already checked out our new channel, Top 10 Nerd Elite, head on over, hit subscribe, do it, it's so good. Number 8. Starfire and Red Hood. When Starfire joined the Outlaws, it was at a really weird time in her life, and a lot of that series in general was considered to be pretty weird for her character, just in terms of her personality, her characterization, and the general goings on. Starting right at the beginning with her flirtation and kiss with Jason Todd, aka Red Hood. Starfire had lost her memories and kissed Jason to relearn his language, having no memory of her previous and probably greatest comic book love, Dick Grayson, aka Nightwing, and therefore not really aware of the importance of the connection between Dick and Jason, who are kind of like adopted brothers in terms of the Bat family, which makes that kiss kinda weird. What's more, it was also later implied that both Starfire and Jason Todd slept with each other before she moved on to another fellow Outlaw member, Roy Harper, aka Arsenal. Which, I'm not like a person that dislikes Starfire and Roy together, it's just the whole thing was kinda weird.
Number 7. Thor and Jane Foster. When it comes to Norse mythology, Thor's wife is Lady Sif. Now in the comics, it's a bit more complicated than that. They were on and off for a while, and I feel like we're gonna get a love triangle in the MCU soon. I mean, it's confirmed that Lady Sif and Jane Foster are both returning in Thor: Love and Thunder. So this could lead to a little triangle of romance, who knows? In Journey into Mystery issue 102, Thor had fallen in love with Lady Sif. So much so that when Sif had been kidnapped by storm giants and ended up as a prisoner of Hela, Thor volunteered as tribute. He actually wanted to trade lives. And Hela was so impressed, she was like, you know what? I'm just gonna let you both go. That's love. I don't know what to do here. And then in Thor issue 236, Sif sacrificed her own life in order to save Jane's. See, Jane in the comics became Thor, but her cancer got worse every time she got mighty and used the powers of Thor. So maybe the reality gem in the MCU has caused some life-altering effects to Jane, and then Lady Sif can somehow be the only one to save her at the end of Thor: Love and Thunder. Wouldn't that be sad? That would be sad, actually. Yeah, that'd be kind of pretty sad. I say this is a weird couple because the MCU has treaded lightly around it. Why Jane is the love interest at all beats me. I mean, the long distance alone, that would be enough for me to be like, nope, bye.
Number 6. Raven and Wally West. What makes that relationship that I mentioned in part 1 between Raven and Wallace West even more strange? Yep, it's time to talk about the relationship between Raven and the original Kid Flash, Wally West. Before Wally West was the Flash, he was Kid Flash, and the new Teen Titans attempted to recruit him to their team. However, Wally wasn't interested in joining up, which caused Raven to cast a spell on him to change his mind. Raven basically made Wally fall in love with her with this spell. What's even worse is that even after it was revealed that he had been manipulated by Raven, Wally still found himself unable to resist and still kind of had feelings for her. Raven herself also had feelings for Wally, but things only got weirder when her dark side was revealed to him, and she actually kind of almost ended up killing him. Needless to say, the two never formally ended up dating, but the attraction continued for a little while thereafter, as bizarre and terrifying as it was, with Wally both alternating between hating Raven and finding himself inexplicably drawn to her. Number 5. Madeline Pryor and Cyclops. Madeline Pryor herself was a clone of Jean Grey, Scott's first love, created by Mr. Sinister, who is obsessed with the Summers family and with creating the perfect mutant, which Madeline was a part of that plot, but only if she had babies. So already we're not starting from a great place in terms of controversy and weirdness. There's also the fact that Scott himself only really seemed to be interested in Maddie because she so closely resembled Jean, which is also pretty weird. But it's even more strange that no one seemed to think of the two women's similarity as being suspicious and potentially the sign of a major problem, namely that Maddie was a clone of Jean. Needless to say, the relationship didn't end very well, with Jean returning from the seeming dead, having never actually been dead but just in stasis, and Scott ditching his new wife and child to join the former X-Men team, now restyled as X-Factor, the first X-Factor team in fact. Number 4. Red Hood and Talia al Ghul. Well, you might be thinking, wait a minute, are either of these characters really superheroes, Amanda? I know a lot of Jason Todd fans out there who would tell you that Red Hood is one of the greatest superheroes there is. True, he does often skew more anti-hero in my opinion, but he still used his sometimes questionably moral approach to heroically help save the world and Gotham on multiple occasions, so I think we should count him. Talia, while definitely more villainous, has also sometimes been known to operate as a heroic ally to Batman as well. So yeah, she's definitely not a hero, but Jason Todd is, so it's fine. Talia actually operating as a heroic ally and love interest to Batman is actually a big part of what makes this relationship so weird actually, as Jason is kind of like an adopted son to Bruce and Talia sees Batman as her beloved, also being the mother of their child together, Damian Wayne. Granted, her and Batman's relationship honestly deserves its own point, as we've discussed before on previous weird romances list. Jason, when he was returned from the dead, had a brief thing with Talia, which in a weird way is like an adopted son getting it on with his stepmom kind of. Yikes. I know there's gonna be a lot of people in the comments. They're gonna be like, Amanda, you know there's this whole thing that's a trend that, I'm gonna be like, look, okay, this is YouTube, we gotta keep it clean for the people, for the children.
Number 3. Wolverine and Lin's son. This next one happens in the 4-parter Wolverine Manifest Destiny. So when Wolverine was in Chinatown, San Francisco, he saved a woman named Lin from the crime lord, the Black Dragon. Now she refers to him as her lover in issue 3. Things are cooking, nice. Now what Wolverine doesn't realize is that by successfully taking out the Black Dragon, which he did, Logan now has to take that spot. He becomes that role. So naturally he refused, but by refusing, that upset Lin. To quit would be dishonorable to everybody, so while he was leaving, she stabbed him in the eye with a spear, warning him not to return. So when the X-Men relocated to San Francisco, he took a trip down memory lane and returned, but this time Lin was not the same. Lin is dead, lover, she says. You killed her a long time ago. And she goes on to explain how now she is the Black Dragon, Queen of the Triads, Empress of the Chinatown underworld. Wolverine took over as the new Black Dragon and Lin escaped through the sewers, holding the same spearhead.
Number 2. Green Arrow and Shadow. Shadow is the sometimes enemy and sometimes ally of Green Arrow, who in the current continuity was the lover of Oliver Queen's father, Robert. She's also the mother of Oliver's half-sister, Emiko, who ends up going on to become the apprentice of Green Arrow. However, before that continuity happened, we had the New Earth version of her character, who was similar in terms of her skills and reputation, but very different in terms of her relationships. Here, Shadow was the sometimes enemy and sometimes ally of Green Arrow, who at one point when he was pursuing her, mistook him for an enemy and fatally shot an arrow through his chest. Learning that it was Green Arrow that she had wounded, she actually nursed him back to health, but during this time while he was recovering, both delirious and feverish, it's also heavily implied and later confirmed that she forced herself upon him. This was highly controversial, especially as there seemed to be no negative consequences for Shadow, who later gave birth to Robert, Oliver's son, whom Green Arrow wouldn't actually find out about until after. Shadow would also refuse to let Green Arrow have a say in their son's life. This whole thing is like, just a lot of problems. And honestly, it was made even more weird by the fact that now and then there seemed to be like a genuine love between Shadow and Green Arrow, making this relationship seem even more confusing and even more toxic. Number 1. Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. We've talked about it before on this channel, and apparently we need to talk about it again, as I saw it brought up a few times in the comments of our part 1 for this list. So here you go everyone, we're gonna talk about it. That's right, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were a thing for a while in the comics. And no, I'm not just talking about when Elizabeth Olsen, who plays Wanda in the MCU, and Aaron Taylor Johnson, who played Pietro, were in the 2014 film Godzilla together and portrayed one another's romantic partners. This happened in canon in the comics, but in ultimately another universe. Get it? ultimately. Get it? That's right, these two were hinted at and then fully revealed to be a couple in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, despite also being siblings still in that universe. And if you're trying to give this relationship some kind of pass or some kind of benefit of the doubt, like a little one, wondering if the two perhaps, I don't know, somehow accidentally came together despite being siblings, like maybe they didn't know, this was no accident. They totally knew. It was just a full-on creepy brother-sister romance.